Cowboy rented a house for one night, but found out an Apache woman had been hiding there for weeks. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The wind pushed across the outskirts of the frontier town with a low, steady pressure, carrying loose grit that scraped along the road as Thatcher Boone walked toward the small cabin the shopkeeper had rented to him. The late autumn air had a sharp edge, and Thatcher felt it through his worn canvas coat as he tightened the collar with stiff fingers. His body ached from weeks of drifting from ranch to ranch, taking whatever work kept him moving. He never stayed anywhere long, never accepted more than a temporary bunkhouse bed, because settling down meant remembering the night his younger brother died in the barn collapse. That memory pushed him forward whenever a place grew too familiar. He had only come to town for supplies and a bed. He didn't want conversation or company. His goal was simple: sleep a full night indoors and ride out at sunrise before the town's noise or questions reached him. That was all. No roots, no ties, no explanations. The cabin sat alone past the last fence line, its roof sagging slightly in the middle, its door leaning off-center, its window patched with an old board nailed over a cracked pane. Thatcher stopped several feet from the entrance, scanning the quiet structure with the cautious habit of a man who had slept in abandoned places before. He checked the ground for fresh tracks, found only old prints faded by wind, and finally stepped forward. Inside the storage nook, Maribel Cross held her breath so tightly that a sharp sting shot through her chest. She pressed her palms against the inner boards to steady herself. She had been hiding there nearly 3 weeks, long enough to know every sound the cabin made, every shift of wood, every movement of the wind. She recognized immediately that the steps outside were too even, too heavy, too controlled to belong to a traveler passing by. Panic tightened in her throat. She had survived only because she stayed still, never revealing herself, never trusting anyone. She wasn't supposed to be found. Not here. Not now. Thatcher opened the door carefully, not barging in, but stepping inside with the deliberate pace of a man who knew quiet rooms sometimes held surprises. He let his eyes adjust to the dim interior. Dust drifted in thin trails where sunlight pushed through gaps in the boards. The air smelled stale, untouched. He didn't see anything unusual. No belongings, no sign that anyone had slept here recently. But something about the room made him pause. It wasn't clear what, only a faint sense that the space held more than it showed. He set his small bag beside the stove and crouched to check inside the firebox. Cold. No recent ash disturbed. He arranged kindling, struck a match, and watched the flames catch. As the light grew, it revealed the tired folds in his shirt and the tense line between his brows, a sign of long days spent working other men's cattle and longer nights walking off memories he never told anyone about. Maribel, hidden behind the loose panel, watched him through a narrow gap. The firelight reached just far enough to outline his movements. He wasn't like the men who had taken her months earlier. They had moved with loud confidence and harsh commands. This man kept his posture quiet, his shoulders lowered, his eyes scanning without aggression. But calm didn't mean trustworthy. She reminded herself of that. Her mission was survival, nothing else. She had escaped the debt gang only because she crawled through thick brush in the dark, her dress torn, her legs shaking, her breath blowing white in freezing air. She had found this cabin by chance, choosing it because it looked abandoned. She had stayed because she didn't know where else to go. She would not reveal herself unless she had no other choice. Thatcher sat on the floor near the stove, stretching his legs and letting the heat reach his knees. His boots were scuffed, his trousers frayed, his coat patched at both elbows. He kept his breathing steady, but inside, a small knot of tension held tight. He hated nights indoors because they reminded him of the barn, of the collapse, of being pulled from the wreckage while his brother never made a sound. Every time he sat inside a quiet building, he waited for the crack of timber or the shift of a roof beam. He didn't show it, but the pressure lived in him all the same. A faint creak sounded from the far corner. His head lifted. The noise was small, barely more than a shift of wood, but it was intentional. Not wind, not weather. Something else. Thatcher didn't stand quickly. A sudden movement could spook whatever or whoever was there. He raised his chin slightly, listening. Another soft movement followed, like a weight settling or someone adjusting cramped legs. Behind the panel, Maribel froze. She cursed herself silently. The cramp in her calf had forced her to move, and now he knew. Her pulse hammered in her ears. If he opened the panel, she had no escape. Her last option would be to fight, but she was too weak to win against any grown man. Thatcher exhaled slowly. He stood, not rushing, not threatening, and walked across the room. His boots hit the boards with steady pressure, not the heavy stomp of someone eager to uncover a hiding place. He moved to the wall and examined the boards around the corner, running his fingers along a damp seam where rain had leaked through. He studied the wood, not the panel Maribel hid behind. She watched him closely. He wasn't pretending ignorance. He simply hadn't placed the sound correctly. That gave her a moment of relief. He stepped back and returned to the stove, adding another log. The fire brightened, filling the cabin with warmer light. He drank from his canteen and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Then he spoke in a calm, low voice. "If someone's in here, I'm not looking to cause trouble." Maribel's lungs tightened. She couldn't understand why he sounded measured instead of alarmed. Most men confronted what confused them. This man waited. That alone made her doubt her instincts. Thatcher kept his gaze on the stove, not the corner. "I'm only here for the night," he continued. "Then I'm gone." He didn't sound like someone searching for her. He didn't sound like someone who worked with the gang she escaped. He sounded tired, bone-tired, and uninterested in anything beyond heat and rest. Maribel shifted slightly, her breath unsteady. The warmth from the stove reached her nook for the first time in days. She felt the chill in her fingers ease a little. She hadn't hoped for comfort since the night she fled. Now she pressed her palm flat against the boards, steadying herself as she considered what seemed impossible. He wasn't here for her. Thatcher watched the fire flicker along the inside of the stove door. He didn't know who hid in the cabin, but he sensed fear. The sound earlier wasn't aggressive. It was defensive, tight, small, controlled. Someone was scared of him, not the other way around. He understood fear. He lived alongside his own every night. He wasn't about to force someone out into the cold. He pulled his blanket onto the floor, sat with his back against the wall, and let the fire warm the room. He listened to the silence, the breathing he almost thought he imagined, the faint shift of weight behind the panel. He didn't speak again. Neither did she. Maribel watched him for nearly an hour, studying every movement he made, judging whether he posed a threat. She saw the tired slump of his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes, the way he didn't look toward her corner again. She felt her fear ease in small increments, never gone, only leveled. Thatcher lowered his head and closed his eyes, not asleep, but resting. He didn't know who hid in the cabin or why, but he trusted his instinct. If they meant him harm, they would have revealed themselves the moment he lit the fire. Maribel leaned her head against the wooden wall, exhausted. Her breath slowed. She didn't relax fully. She couldn't afford that. But for the first time in weeks, she let her body sink slightly into the space around her. Both of them stayed awake longer than they admitted. Both of them listened to the same quiet room. Both of them waited for the other to make a wrong move. Neither did. And as night settled over the cabin, one truth became clear. This place was no longer empty, and neither was the life of the man who rented it or the woman who hid inside it. Thatcher Boone woke before daylight reached the window. Years of drifting and sleeping in unstable places had trained his body to react to the smallest sound, and what pulled him from half-sleep was a faint shift of wood from the corner he had suspected last night. His eyes opened immediately. He didn't lift his head at first. He listened. Another sound followed, so light it could have been a piece of cloth brushing the boards. But it wasn't the wind. It carried intent. Caution. Someone was trying not to be heard. Thatcher breathed slowly, keeping his posture still against the wall. He felt his pulse rise, not from fear, but from a clear understanding. The cabin wasn't empty, and whoever hid there was awake and alert. He weighed his options quickly. If he moved too fast, he'd frighten them. If he ignored the noise, he'd risk escalation. He decided to let the room speak first. Inside the hiding nook, Maribel Cross squeezed her eyes shut, angry at the small motion her cramped legs had forced on her. She had shifted only an inch to relieve pressure in her foot, but the echo betrayed her. She waited for heavy footsteps or the scrape of a weapon, both of which she had grown used to anticipating during captivity. Neither came. The silence in the cabin held steady, not aggressive, not demanding, only expectant. She leaned forward slightly, pressing her forehead against the rough wood. She needed to decide whether to stay hidden or prepare to run. But where would she go? Outside was open land. She would be exposed instantly. Inside was a stranger, but he hadn't acted like the men she escaped. He hadn't searched the cabin. He hadn't raised his voice or threatened her. He simply acknowledged her presence and then left her alone. That alone wasn't trust, but it wasn't danger either. Thatcher finally moved, pushing himself up with methodical care. He didn't go near the corner. Instead, he checked the stove, added a piece of wood, and listened as the fire resumed its steady crackle. He wanted to show his hands were busy, not approaching anything hidden. The tension between them wasn't aggressive. It was fragile, like two animals testing each other's intentions. He spoke quietly, still facing the stove. "You don't have to stay in that corner." No response, only the subtle vibration of someone holding their breath. He wiped his palms on his trousers and continued. "I heard you again. I'm not going to force anything." His tone stayed, even almost tired. "But I won't pretend I didn't notice." Maribel's heartbeat kicked hard against her ribs. She held the edge of the wood panel and waited. If he came closer, she would retreat deeper into the tiny space. But he didn't move. He stayed beside the stove, giving her distance. Thatcher turned slightly toward the table instead of her direction. He reached for his canteen, took a drink, and then placed it on the table in a way that felt intentional. "If you need water," he said, "it's here." The simplicity of the gesture unsettled Maribel. She wasn't used to kindness without conditions. For months, she had lived under threats, commands, and fear. This was different, quiet, steady, without expectation. Her mind raced. If she revealed herself, she risked everything. But if she stayed hidden, she would run out of food, warmth, and strength. And the gang might return to the area. She had already survived longer than she believed possible. Hiding forever wasn't an option. Thatcher stepped toward the window and nudged the crooked board covering the cracked pane. He adjusted it until the draft eased. He didn't sigh or complain, didn't show irritation about the cold. He simply fixed the problem. Maribel noticed the care in that small act. She saw the way his shoulders tightened when he moved, as if pain lived deep in his muscles. She wondered if the tension came from injury or guilt. She didn't understand why she cared, but curiosity appeared before she could stop it. Thatcher turned from the window and faced the room as if deciding something important. "I'll be sitting outside for a few minutes," he said quietly. Maribel tensed. He lifted his coat from the chair. "I need to check the horse. I won't block the door. If you want to step out from wherever you are, that's your choice." Her breath caught. He was creating space for her without knowing who she was. Thatcher opened the door and stepped out into the cold morning. The air bit at his face, and he welcomed the fresh sting because it forced him to stay grounded. He walked toward his horse, checked the saddle straps, and ran a hand along the animal's neck. His mind wasn't fully on the task. He kept replaying the faint, tense sound from the cabin. Whoever hid inside wasn't a threat. He felt that in his bones. The hidden person sounded scared, not dangerous. He understood fear that came from experience, not imagination. Inside, Maribel stared at the open space he left behind. The door wasn't completely shut. He had left it ajar on purpose. She recognized the gesture instantly. He wanted her to choose what happened next without pressure. She pressed her palm against the inner wall once more. Her breathing grew uneven. Stepping out would change everything. But staying hidden would keep her locked in the same fear that had controlled her for months. Her muscles shook as she made her decision. She slowly pushed the loose panel aside. The moment marked the first choice she made for herself since she escaped. Thatcher tightened the saddle cinch and felt a faint shift in the air behind him, a quiet draft from the cabin door, different from before. He turned slowly, not to startle whoever stepped out, but to acknowledge the change. A thin silhouette appeared just inside the doorway, half hidden by shadow. She wasn't ready to come fully into the light, but she wasn't hiding anymore. For both of them, the second chapter of that morning had begun, and neither had expected to share it. Thatcher Boone didn't move right away when he noticed a shadow in the doorway. He kept one hand on the saddle and watched carefully, giving the figure time to adjust to the cold morning air and the weight of being seen. He understood what it meant for someone to hide for weeks. He understood the cost of stepping out. So he didn't approach. He didn't call out. He simply waited. Inside the doorway, Maribel Cross kept her fingers wrapped tight around the frame, her knuckles pale from how hard she gripped it. The cold air hit her bare feet and climbed up her legs, and she regretted stepping out for a moment. Not because of him, but because her body had grown used to the small, stale warmth inside the nook. Her heartbeat climbed higher than she wanted. She wasn't trembling from the cold. She was trembling from the decision she had made. She forced her eyes upward, studying him in full for the first time. He stood with a careful stillness, the kind carried by someone who didn't rush unless necessary. She saw the tired set of his shoulders, the faint tension in his jaw, the way his fingers steadied themselves on the saddle before he finally stepped back from the horse to show he wasn't blocking her escape. Thatcher adjusted his coat collar and spoke evenly. "You can stay there if it feels safer." His voice didn't push. It didn't soften artificially. It stayed level, giving her room to breathe. Maribel swallowed hard. Her throat felt stiff from days of silence. "I wasn't sure if you'd open the wall. I noticed something was off," Thatcher admitted, "but I chose not to dig." She hesitated, unsure whether to trust the truth of that. Most men pried. Most men demanded explanations. The fact that he hadn't made her uneasy in a different way, like she was waiting for the real danger to reveal itself. Thatcher motioned gently toward the open door behind her. "You don't have to stand out here in the cold. I'm not stepping inside until you decide what you want to do." Maribel blinked rapidly, confused by his restraint. "Why?" "Because you're scared," he answered plainly, "and I'm not here to make that worse." His honesty hit her harder than she expected. She dropped her gaze to the ground, the dirt shifting beneath her bare toes. She had survived the gang by expecting the worst from everyone. Now she was facing the possibility that someone might not intend harm, and that felt almost more threatening because it challenged the rules that kept her alive. She took a slow step backward into the cabin. Not fully in, not fully out, just enough to close the distance between herself and warmth. Thatcher stayed where he stood, watching her movements carefully, not intruding. She spoke again, quieter this time. "You said you're leaving at sunrise." "That was the plan," Thatcher replied. "Is it still?" He considered her question. His plan had shifted the moment he heard the fear in her movements, but he hadn't decided how much he was willing to change. "It depends," he said. "If leaving puts you in danger, I'll wait." Her breath caught. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough to see you're alone," he answered. "Sometimes that's enough to decide whether you walk away from someone or not." Inside her chest, something tightened and then loosened in the same beat. She wasn't ready to accept help, not fully, but she couldn't ignore the steadiness in his voice. She stepped fully inside the cabin and touched the edge of the table for balance. Her legs felt unsteady from too many hours curled in a cramped space. When she reached the stove, she held her hands near the metal, welcoming the heat. The fire's glow showed the dark circles under her eyes, the hollow spots at her temples, and the fading lines of bruises on her arm. Thatcher followed her with his gaze from outside. "Do you want me to come in?" he asked. "Or wait out here a little longer?" Maribel's breath trembled as she looked at him. She wasn't sure whether she was ready for him to share the same space, but she knew she couldn't stand out in the cold doorway forever. The fear that had defined her for months didn't lift, but it shifted slightly, making room for something else. Caution mixed with exhausted hope. "You can come in," she said finally, her voice steady despite the shaking in her hands. Thatcher nodded once, stepped toward the door, and paused just before crossing the threshold. It was instinct, a habit of giving people space before entering their world. She noticed it, and it eased her tension more than any kind word might have. When he stepped inside, he closed the door gently. No slam, no sudden movement. Maribel backed up a few inches to make room, keeping her shoulder near the stove where the warmth settled strongest. Thatcher remained near the door, not approaching her. He took in the room again, now seeing it not as a place to sleep, but as a place where someone had been fighting for survival under miserable conditions. "How long have you been here?" he asked. She wet her lips. "Since the night I escaped." His jaw tightened at the word escaped. He didn't ask from what. He didn't ask who held her. Instead, he checked the cabin with a new purpose, noting the weak spots, the broken frame, the thin walls, and the window that needed reinforcement. "Anyone come looking?" he asked. "Not yet," she whispered. "But they will. They always check towns." Thatcher lowered his head, slightly, as he absorbed the weight of her words. "Then hiding alone here isn't enough anymore." She felt panic rise. "I don't want to bring trouble to anyone." "You didn't bring it," Thatcher said firmly. "They're the trouble. You're someone trying to stay alive." Her chest ached at the clarity in his tone. He stepped toward the stove, pulled the last chair closer to her side, and set it down slowly so its legs wouldn't scrape. He sat, keeping a comfortable distance. Close enough to hear her, far enough not to intimidate her. "My name's Thatcher Boone," he offered. "I work ranch jobs wherever they need hands. I don't stay long." Maribel studied his face. Tired eyes, calm posture, quiet strength. "Then why stay now?" "Because leaving doesn't feel right," he said simply. "Not with you here." The words landed with weight, but not pressure. She swallowed, feeling heat prick her eyes though she didn't cry. She looked toward the nook she had lived in for 3 weeks. "I thought I died in that corner," she admitted. "Not from wounds. From waiting." Thatcher looked at the panel, the cramped space that had kept her alive. "You're out now," he said, "and no one's forcing you back in." The morning light crept slowly across the floorboards, illuminating them both. For the first time since she fled, Maribel wasn't alone with her fear. For the first time in years, Thatcher wasn't the only soul in the room with a heavy past. Their shared silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt like the start of something neither had planned, and neither was ready to walk away from. The fire burned steady by mid-morning, filling the cabin with a warm, uneven glow. Maribel sat close to the stove on the floor, her knees pulled in, her hands open toward the heat as if trying to thaw more than just her skin. Thatcher Boone stood near the table, deciding what to do with the sparse supplies he carried. He wasn't a man who cooked for others often. Most mornings he ate cold biscuits and coffee straight from a tin, but he couldn't ignore the faint tremble in her arms or the way her breath caught every few minutes from exhaustion. He rummaged through his bag and set a small tin of beans on the table. He also pulled out a piece of hardtack, softened slightly by the dampness of the week's travel. It wasn't much, but he had eaten less on harder days. He set a pot on the stove, poured water into it, and added the beans. The scent rose slowly, thin but warm, filling the air with something that resembled comfort. Maribel watched him through the hair falling over her face. She didn't understand why he was helping her without asking anything in return. She kept waiting for him to question her past or demand an explanation for her concealment, but he didn't. He moved with the calm patience of someone who respected the weight of silence. When the meal was ready, Thatcher fetched 2 tin plates from the shelf, one slightly bent, the other scratched nearly smooth, and set them both on the table. He ladled the beans evenly, not favoring himself. Then he stepped back from the table and motioned lightly to the nearest plate. "It's ready," he said. Maribel hesitated. Her legs ached from weeks of curling in a confined space, and standing felt exposed. She pushed herself up slowly, bracing a hand against the wall for balance. When she reached the table, she didn't sit right away. She looked at the food, then at him, weighing the moment. She didn't see hunger in his eyes, only a quiet insistence that she deserved to eat. She finally lowered herself onto the chair. The wood creaked beneath her, the sound startling her nerves. She steadied herself and lifted the spoon. The first bite made her eyes close involuntarily. She'd forgotten what warm food felt like. Heat spread across her tongue, then down her throat, easing the tightness that had grown there over weeks. Thatcher watched her only long enough to confirm she wasn't about to faint. Then he returned to his own seat across from her. He ate with slow, deliberate motion, giving her time to adjust to the presence of another person. Maribel finished half the plate before realizing she hadn't thanked him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, setting the spoon down. He shrugged lightly. "You needed it." "That's not. Most people don't do things for no reason. Most people don't get found hiding inside a cabin," Thatcher replied. His tone wasn't sharp. It was blunt truth softened by something steady. "And most people don't look at a plate like it might disappear if they blink." Maribel lowered her gaze. She wasn't used to someone noticing the small things. A soft knock of wind against the loose board made her jump. Thatcher leaned forward slightly, not to approach, but to show he noticed her reaction. "It's just the wind," he said. "You're safe in here for now." The words weren't dramatic, but they carried weight. She inhaled shakily, feeling the tension in her shoulders loosen bit by bit. He stood when he finished his meal and carried both plates to the basin. "You don't need to clean anything," he said. "You're barely holding yourself upright." Maribel bristled slightly at that. "I'm not helpless." "Didn't say you were." Thatcher rinsed the plates with controlled movements, careful not to splash the remaining water. "I'm saying you look worn down. That's not weakness. It's what happens when you hide in a wall for 3 weeks." Hearing the truth of it made her throat tighten. She took a slow breath and sat straighter. "I didn't know if this place was safe." "It wasn't," he said, placing the plates upside down to dry. "Not until now." She flinched at his confidence. "You don't know what's coming." "No," he agreed. "But I know what's here. And right now, that's a fire, food, and someone who shouldn't be alone." Maribel lowered her eyes, processing each word. She wasn't sure if she believed him. She wasn't sure she could afford to believe anyone. But his presence didn't feel like a threat. It felt grounding, something she hadn't experienced in months. Thatcher wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped back from the table. "I need to check the woods behind the cabin," he said, "just to see if there's any fresh tracks." She stiffened. "If they're nearby, I'll know," he said calmly, "and I'll come back before the fire dies." Maribel stood, gripping the back of the chair. "If they find you here, they'll assume." "I don't care what they assume," Thatcher said. The firmness in his voice wasn't directed at her. It was directed at whatever danger might be waiting outside. She recognized the tone instantly. It was the same tone her father used when warning off trouble before he was killed trying to protect her. Thatcher reached for his coat. Before he stepped outside, he paused. "You can lock the door behind me if you want." Maribel considered the offer. Trust was still a fragile thing, but locking him out wouldn't protect her from what hunted her. Still, the gesture mattered. She nodded once. He stepped out, and she slid the latch quietly into place. The sound felt strange, like she was protecting someone who was trying to protect her. She leaned her forehead against the door and exhaled shakily. For the first time since her escape, she wasn't only reacting to danger. She was making choices again. The door latch clicked softly as Maribel unlocked it an hour later, just as Thatcher Boone returned from checking the wooded area behind the cabin. The cold settled across his coat and drew pale steam from his breath as he stepped inside, brushing dust from his sleeves. He didn't look alarmed, but there was a tightness in his expression that hadn't been there earlier. Something he'd seen in the brush. Something he wasn't ready to put into words until he understood it better. Maribel watched him from near the stove, her posture lighter than before, but still guarded. She had spent the past hour pacing the floor in slow, tense lines, trying to calm the thoughts gathering inside her like storm clouds. She knew that if he'd seen tracks or signs of danger, she would have to admit what she hadn't said yet. She didn't want to speak her past aloud because saying it made everything real again, but hiding it wouldn't help them prepare. Thatcher set his gloves on the table and shrugged out of his coat. "No one close," he said, pulling warmth back into his hands, "but I found old prints. Maybe 2 days old. Hard to tell how many." Maribel's breath caught. "Were they riding?" "On foot," he replied, "but moving with purpose." Her stomach nodded. She didn't need him to explain what that meant. She had lived with the reality of being hunted for too long. Those men never stopped once they marked someone as valuable. She tightened her grip on the edge of the stove, the heat grounding her. Thatcher studied her reaction, how her shoulders tightened then dropped, how her eyes darted toward the window and back. "They after you?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She walked to the small bench near the far wall and sat down, folding her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "It was a debt," she said finally. "Not mine. My father's. They said he owed them more than he could pay. He told them he didn't. They didn't care." Thatcher moved closer, stopping several feet away, not looming over her, but giving her room to speak. "They came at night," she continued, staring at the floorboards. "They tied my parents and said one of us had to go with them until the debt was covered. My father told them to take him." Her voice shook once, but she kept talking. "They took me instead." Thatcher's jaw tightened, not from surprise. He had seen men do far worse for far less, but from anger that someone her age had been dragged into something she never owed. "They kept us moving," she said, "town to town. They made me work for them, clean for them, do anything they demanded. One of them would say I was lucky they didn't sell me farther south." Her throat constricted at the memory. "I escaped when they drank too much after a job. I ran until my legs wouldn't hold me. I crawled the last part before I found this cabin." Thatcher didn't interrupt. He watched her hands tremble, watched her eyes flicker with the effort of holding everything inside for so long. He recognized the moment she'd reach her limit. People who carried trauma never chose to speak until the weight of silence pressed too heavily on their chest. She needed air, even if the air hurt. She wiped her palms on her dress. "I didn't come out when you arrived because I thought you might be one of them, or someone paid by them. I've seen what they do to people who help me." Thatcher leaned a shoulder against the wall, his expression steady. "No one sent me," he said, "and I don't work for men who trade people like property." She met his eyes for the first time since she began talking. "You believe me?" "You lived in a wall for weeks," Thatcher answered, his tone plain and certain. "I'd be a fool not to." A long, shuddering breath escaped her. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something heavier, something closer to trust forming in small, reluctant steps. Thatcher stepped closer, but still kept distance. "Those tracks," he said, "they may not be from the same men, but we prepare as if they are." Maribel nodded, though her fear rose sharply. "If they find this place, I'll handle it," Thatcher said. The confidence in his voice wasn't for show. It came from a man who'd spent years surviving dangerous territory, working cattle trails where thieves and drifters tested every ranch hand's resolve. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't easily frightened either. Maribel lowered her gaze again. "If you stay because you feel sorry for me." "I don't," Thatcher interrupted gently. "I stay because you shouldn't be out here alone, and leaving now would sit wrong." She searched his face, evaluating his sincerity. He didn't look like a man playing hero. He looked like someone who understood loss and refused to let someone else endure it if he could help. Maribel stood slowly, steadying herself with the edge of the bench. She walked toward the window, her bare feet silent on the boards. She stared out at the open stretch of land, her eyes tracking the tree line as if expecting shapes to emerge at any moment. "I don't know how to live normally anymore," she admitted. "I forgot what it feels like not to flinch." Thatcher reached for his coat, but didn't put it on. He folded it over one arm, considering his words carefully. "You don't need to be normal today," he said. "You just need to breathe. We'll deal with the rest as it comes." She turned her head slightly, enough to see him in the corner of her vision. "You say we like it's decided." "It is," he said simply. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind pressed lightly against the cabin walls, and the smell of the dying fire filled the room. Maribel's shoulders lowered for the first time since she stepped from the hiding nook. Thatcher shifted his weight, his expression softening just enough to show he understood the fear threaded through her silence. In that quiet moment, two people who had lived entirely separate lives found themselves connected by a fragile, unexpected alliance, shaped not by promises or dramatic declarations, but by survival, honesty, and the simple decision not to walk away. The past had caught both of them in different ways, but for the first time, neither of them faced it alone. The daylight slipped away faster than either of them expected, leaving a dim amber glow stretching across the floorboards. Thatcher Boone added another piece of wood to the stove, the flames rising enough to push back the evening chill. The cabin warmed slowly, carrying a steady hum that softened the edges of the room. Maribel Cross sat near the far wall, her legs crossed beneath her back straightening every few minutes when old pains reminded her of the weeks she spent cramped behind a hidden panel. Thatcher watched her posture from across the room. She wasn't fragile. She held herself with quiet discipline, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion that no rest had been able to erase yet. He respected the way she masked discomfort, but he also understood the toll it took to pretend nothing hurt. His own back still stiffened every time he sat near a wall too long, a leftover tension from the night his brother died. He recognized the twitch of someone trying not to reveal weakness. Maribel shifted her hands toward the firelight, rubbing warmth into her fingers. "It feels different tonight," she said without looking at him. "Not safer. Just less like I have to hide in the walls." Thatcher pulled his coat from the peg and draped it over the back of her chair. "Hiding takes more out of you than you think," he replied. "When you stop, everything hits at once." She didn't reach for the coat, but she acknowledged the gesture with a small nod. She didn't want pity. What she wanted, what she'd been denied for months, was to be treated like a person again, someone with needs that didn't involve fear as a condition. Thatcher sat at the table, elbows resting loosely on its worn surface. "You sleep at all last night?" Maribel hesitated. "I tried. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps that weren't there." He didn't judge her answer. "It'll take time. Your mind keeps replaying danger even when the room is quiet." She finally met his gaze. "Does that happen to you?" He held her eyes for a moment before answering. "Most nights." Her expression shifted, something between empathy and realization. She had assumed he was simply quiet by nature, but now she understood it went deeper. They were two people shaped by different kinds of loss, both carrying reflexes they didn't ask for. Thatcher stood and walked to the window. He checked the latch again, pressing the crooked frame until it held firmly. "I reinforced it with a few nails," he said. "Should stay shut unless the wind kicks hard." Maribel watched the careful way he moved, as though he was making sure every corner of the cabin worked as it should. "Why do you fix things that aren't yours?" she asked. He paused with his hand still on the window frame. "Because someone's living here right now," he said. "Makes it mine enough." The simplicity of the answer stunned her. It wasn't romantic or dramatic or said for effect. It was practical, sincere. She didn't know how to respond, so she let the fire fill the silence. Thatcher returned to the table and pulled out his small bedroll. He spread it near the door, leaving her the warmer area near the stove. She frowned slightly. "You don't have to sleep that far from the fire," she said. "It's fine," he said. "Old habit. I sleep better knowing I can hear the door." Maribel understood what that meant. He wasn't afraid of her. He was protecting the cabin from whatever might try to force its way in. The thought sent a strange warmth through her stomach, one she didn't know how to name. Gratitude felt too small. She hadn't felt protected in so long that the emotion itself felt unfamiliar. She drew her legs closer and watched him arrange the bedroll. "You keep looking at the tree line," she said softly. "What did you really see earlier?" Thatcher weighed the question before responding. A few broken branches and footsteps pointed south. No fresh campfires. No signs of a chase. But enough to make you uneasy. He met her gaze. "Enough to make me pay attention." Her breath tightened. She had hoped the danger was farther away. Thatcher noticed the tension in her hands. "If they come near, we'll hear them long before they reach the cabin. And I'll be ready." She looked down. "You talk like protecting me is already your job." "It's not a job," he said quietly. "It's a choice." The words settled between them with a weight neither tried to disturb. Maribel shifted closer to the fire, letting the warmth reach her legs. "If they do find this place, we'll handle it," Thatcher interrupted, firm but calm. "But I'm not planning for the worst until there's reason." She nodded slowly, comforted not by false promises, but by his steady realism. As the room dimmed further, the fire casting soft flickers along the walls, she finally asked something she'd held back since morning. "What were you doing out here before I came into the open?" "Try to sleep through a night without thinking about something I can't change," he answered honestly. Her lips parted slightly. "Your brother?" Thatcher stiffened almost imperceptibly. He didn't deny it. He didn't look away. He simply acknowledged the truth with a single nod. Long time ago. Doesn't feel like it. Maribel pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Pain doesn't care how much time passes. No, he agreed. It just changes shape. The fire crackled softly. The wind pushed against the walls, but didn't rattle them the way it did before he reinforced the window. For the first time since her escape, Maribel didn't flinch at the sound. Thatcher laid down on the bedroll, folding one arm behind his head, keeping his other hand near his boots in case he needed to move fast. Maribel settled against the wall, her body easing despite the tension still lingering inside her. The last thing she heard before sleep pulled her under was Thatcher's steady breathing, a sound that felt unexpectedly reassuring. And for the first time in months, she drifted into rest without expecting someone to drag her awake. The first light of dawn reached the cabin in a thin, pale strip, landing across the floor near Maribel's feet. She stirred awake with a start, her hand instinctively reaching for a wall that wasn't enclosing her anymore. For a brief second, confusion gripped her. She expected the cramped boards of the hiding nook, the stale air, the suffocating darkness. Instead, she felt open space, warm air from the stove's lingering coals, and the slow, steady breathing of someone else nearby. Thatcher Boone lay on his bedroll near the door, one arm draped across his chest, the other resting beside his boots. He wasn't fully asleep. His breathing had the controlled rhythm of someone trained to wake at the slightest disturbance. His coat covered half his frame, and the rest of him was curled just enough to ease the stiffness in his back. Even in rest, he looked alert, as if any sound outside could pull him up instantly. Maribel pushed herself upright carefully, her muscles stiff from days of stress rather than the floor itself. She watched him for a long moment. She wasn't studying him out of fear this time, but out of wonder at how someone could share a space with her without demanding anything. She didn't know what he gained from staying. She only knew he hadn't left her alone with the night. She stood slowly, letting the blanket fall around her shoulders. Her bare feet touched the cold floor, and she held her breath as she stepped toward the stove. The embers were fading but still warm enough to revive. She crouched, added 2 pieces of wood from the small stack, and gently coaxed the flame back to life. The crackle broke the silence in a soft, natural way. Thatcher's eyes opened immediately. He didn't jolt. He didn't grab for anything. He simply adjusted his focus to her movements and took in the scene with a calm that made Maribel's shoulders ease. "You're up early," he said, voice low from sleep. "I'm used to it," she answered. "Hiding doesn't let you sleep long." He pushed himself upright with slow, deliberate motion, rolling his shoulders against the stiffness. "You sleep better last night than the ones before?" She hesitated, then nodded. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't. Her voice tightened. It wasn't like the other nights. Thatcher accepted her answer without probing. "Fire looks good. I added wood," she said, almost apologetically. He shook his head lightly. "You don't need to ask permission to do that." She lowered her gaze and used to the idea of acting freely. Thatcher rose fully, brushed dust from his trousers, and stretched his back with a muted groan. Maribel watched the way he rolled his neck and winced slightly. "You're hurt," she said before she could stop herself. "It's an old thing," he replied, adjusting his coat. "Not much to do about it." "You slept on the cold floor," she said, frowning. "No wonder it hurts." He gave a faint, tired smile. "I sleep on worse most nights." Maribel stepped back, studying him more closely. He looked stronger than she remembered from the night before. Not because he appeared more imposing, but because he carried a steadiness that didn't rely on bravado. He simply existed with quiet discipline, which somehow made him feel safer than anyone she had met. Thatcher noticed her studying him, but didn't comment. Instead, he reached for his canteen and held it out to her. "Drink before you start the day. Helps steady the nerves." She took it hesitantly, sipping the cool water. "You're acting like you're staying," she said softly. He paused only a second before answering. "I am." Her hands tightened around the canteen. "You have no reason to." Thatcher stepped closer, not too close, keeping a respectful distance, and looked her directly in the eyes. "You're in danger." That's reason enough. Maribel's throat tightened. She wanted to challenge the logic, not because she disagreed, but because she couldn't understand why someone would willingly involve themselves in her nightmare. But Thatcher's expression didn't waver. He wasn't asking for gratitude. He wasn't pretending to be a savior. He was simply stating a fact. Maribel set the canteen on the table and exhaled shakily. I don't want someone hurt because of me. That isn't your burden alone, Thatcher said. And if danger comes, I'd rather be here than hear about it after. She blinked hard, processing the unexpected loyalty in his words. Thatcher broke the heaviness of the moment by moving toward the window. He lifted the board slightly and scanned the landscape. Tracks from yesterday were heading south, he said. Could be passing men. Could be scouts. Hard to tell without more sign. Maribel stepped closer, instinctively lowering her voice. What do we do? We stay alert, he answered. We keep the place ordered, and you stay out of sight until we know who's circling near this area. The word we hit her again, not as a promise, but as a commitment he'd already accepted. Her hands fidgeted with the blanket. If they come here, I don't know if I can face them. You won't be facing them alone, Thatcher said, turning to her. His tone was quiet but firm. I've dealt with men like that before. She swallowed hard. They're not just thieves. They're cruel. So am I when pushed, he said honestly. The bluntness made her chest tighten in a new way. Not fear, but a feeling of being protected by someone who didn't hide his capabilities. Thatcher moved toward the table, pulling out his small knife to cut a stale piece of bread. He offered half to her. You need strength today. We'll likely have a long one. Maribel accepted the bread, studying the rough edges of the slice. You talk like helping me is natural. He shrugged lightly. Feels wrong to walk away from someone who's been fighting alone. She closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the simple truth of that. When she opened them, she noticed he had shifted his bedroll farther from the door, closer to the wall. Why move it, she asked. Better line of sight to the windows, he said, and it keeps the draft off. Maribel took a deep breath, feeling something inside her settle. Not fully, not safely, but enough to let her shoulders ease for the first time since she'd escaped. The fire grew brighter, filling the room with a stronger warmth. The scent of burning wood, faint smoke, and early morning cold mixed into something that almost felt like a home preparing for the day. Thatcher stood near the door, tightening the strap on his holster. I'll look around again once the sun's higher, he said. You stay here. Keep the fire up. And if anything feels off, stay low and silent. I'll be back fast. Maribel stepped toward him without meaning to. Thatcher, don't go far. He paused, turning his head enough for her to see the faint softness in his expression. I won't. She released a breath she'd been holding since the moment he mentioned scouting. As Thatcher stepped outside, Maribel closed the door behind him and leaned her back against it. Her heartbeat wasn't steady yet, but for the first time since she ran, it wasn't driven entirely by fear. It was driven by something new. Someone else was out there watching her back. And that changed everything. By late afternoon, the sky dimmed under a slow-moving bank of clouds, turning the cabin's interior into a muted blend of orange firelight and gray shadow. Maribel sat near the stove, sewing a tear in her sleeve with thread she found inside an old tin. Her hands weren't steady, but the repetition kept her thoughts from spiraling. Every shift of the wind outside made her pause and listen, expecting heavy boots or coarse voices. Nothing came. Thatcher Boone returned as the light faded, stepping inside with a careful pace. His boots carried fresh dirt, and his coat was chilled from the long hours spent walking the perimeter. He closed the door with a controlled motion, not loud, not sudden. When he pulled off his gloves, Maribel saw the faint red marks across his knuckles, signs of gripping the cold too long. She immediately stood. Did you see anything new? He shook his head once. Still quiet. No new tracks. No movement near the ridge. He hung his coat on the peg and added, but quiet doesn't always mean safe. Maribel felt her stomach tighten. Do you think they're circling somewhere farther out? It's possible, he said. Men like that don't give up quick, but they also don't wander without purpose. If they're looking, they'll follow patterns, check towns, check cabins. He paused. We're not on the main trail. That buys time. She sank back in her seat, absorbing every word. I keep replaying their voices, she admitted. Every time I think I'm calm, I hear them again. Thatcher crouched beside the stove, brushing ash from the grate before adding a thick log. The fire responded with a deep crackle that warmed the room instantly. Fear doesn't switch off, he said. It stays until you give it something stronger to lean against. Maribel watched the way he coaxed the fire to life. What was yours? She asked. What helped you push past it? He stopped mid-motion, the question hitting him deeper than she intended. He sat back on his heels, wiped soot on his trouser leg, and looked at the wall as if seeing something far older than the cabin. For a long time, he said, voice low, nothing helped. I figured I'd drift forever because staying anywhere made the past louder. She didn't interrupt. When my brother died in that barn, he continued. Every sound after creaking wood, wind hitting walls, it put me right back under that roof. No place felt steady. No face felt familiar long enough to trust. Drifting became the only thing that made sense. Maribel swallowed. She didn't pity him. She recognized the same survival instinct she carried. Keep moving so memory can't catch you. So why stay here? She asked, her voice steady but soft. Thatcher lifted his gaze to hers, meeting her question without flinching. Because you're scared but you're not broken, he said. And walking away from someone who's fighting that hard doesn't sit right with me. Her breath hitched. She'd expected a practical answer. Safety, strategy, maybe duty. She hadn't expected something so deeply human. She looked away briefly, blinking back the sting in her eyes. I'm not worth getting dragged into trouble for. That's not your call, Thatcher said. The firmness in his tone stunned her. He stood and walked to the table, pulling out a small cloth bag where he kept his spare ammunition. He sorted through the cartridges, checking each one with a practiced thumb. Maribel watched quietly, noticing how careful he was with every movement, not rushing, not wasting motion. This was a man preparing, not for war, but for responsibility. After a long silence, she spoke again. Thatcher, if they come here, I don't know if I can stand in front of them. I don't know if I can even speak. You won't need to, he said, not looking up from the cartridges. I'll deal with them. But you don't owe me anything, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. He finally met her eyes, calm and unwavering. I'm not doing this because I owe you, he said. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Maribel pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat respond in uneven waves. She had been treated like property for months, like something claimed, used, guarded for reasons that weren't hers. Hearing someone speak to her without an angle or demand disarmed her entirely. Thatcher set the ammunition aside and pulled up a chair across from her. He rested his arms on the back of it, leaning forward in a relaxed but attentive posture. You're not alone anymore, he said plainly. You can stop thinking like you are. The words landed with an impact she wasn't prepared for. Her voice cracked. I don't remember how to not be alone. Then we'll figure it out slow. She tried to answer, but her throat closed. The room felt warmer than before, not because of the fire, but because of the steady presence across from her. She shifted her weight, uncertain, nervous. Why do you care this much? She whispered. He didn't hesitate. Because I know what it looks like when nobody cares. And I won't let that happen to you. The directness hit her like a truth she'd been starved for. She pulled her knees close, gripping the fabric of her dress. I don't want to hide anymore, she admitted. I'm tired. I'm tired of waiting to be dragged back. Thatcher nodded once. Then you won't hide. Not while I'm here. For a moment, the world outside the cabin fell away. The wind lost its bite. The walls stopped feeling like barriers. The fire steadied. Maribel looked at him with something new in her eyes. Not just fear now, not just survival. A fragile, cautious trust. Thatcher stood slowly and gathered her empty sewing tin, placing it gently on the shelf. Get some rest, he said. Tonight's quiet. You deserve to breathe. She didn't lie and say she wasn't afraid. But for the first time, fear wasn't the only thing she felt. She watched his silhouette as he checked the door latch, the window frame, and the edge of the roof where the wind sometimes slipped through. He wasn't just securing the cabin. He was securing their small, growing piece of safety. And Maribel realized something as she lay down near the fire. He hadn't chosen the journey here, but today he had chosen her. The morning arrived without threat. For the first time since Maribel Cross had stepped out of the hiding nook, the sun rose cleanly over the ridge, casting a gentle light across the cabin walls. The air outside carried a low breeze, steady and cool, brushing against the window Thatcher Boone had reinforced. Inside, the fire burned quietly, the warmth spreading evenly across the room. Thatcher had been awake long before dawn. He stood outside the cabin now, scanning the empty stretch of land with narrowed eyes. He wasn't tense, he was focused. The hours of scouting yesterday had given him enough information to understand the situation. Whatever tracks he'd seen were fading, leading south, not circling back. No return prints. No smoke from distant camps. No broken branches that suggested a lingering threat. The men hunting her had moved on, but he didn't trust luck. Not yet. He remained still for another minute before stepping back inside. Maribel sat at the table with her hands wrapped around a warm tin cup of water. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, brushed by her fingers rather than neglect. Her posture was straighter than the day before, as though sleep had finally given her enough strength to stand without bracing for harm. She looked up the moment he entered. "Anything?" "Nothing out there," he said, closing the door softly. "Tracks are old. They're not close." A slow breath escaped her. Not quite relief, but something close. She set the cup down. "I don't know what to do next," she murmured. "I never planned past surviving the night." Thatcher leaned against the door, arms crossed, studying her quietly. "Then we figure out the next steps together." The word "together" made her chest tighten. She wasn't used to having a say in her future. She wasn't used to imagining one at all. He walked toward the table and sat across from her. "Tell me what you want," he said. "Not what you fear. What you want." She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at her hands, the faint marks on her wrists, the trembling that came and went without warning. "I want to stop hiding," she whispered. "I want to feel like I'm allowed to exist without being chased." Thatcher nodded. "That's a start." Her eyes lifted. "And I don't want to be alone anymore." Those words came out fragile, almost apologetic, as if she expected judgment for saying them. "You're not," he answered simply. She stared at him for a long time, searching his expression for uncertainty or hesitation. She found neither. His calm was unwavering, built on decisions he didn't back away from once made. Thatcher rested his arms on the table. "The cabin needs repairs," he said. "Roof leaks on the east side. Door frames warped. Stovepipe needs fixing before winter gets rough." His voice stayed steady, practical. "I could stay a while. Put things in order. If you want that." Her breath caught. "You'd stay here, if it means you're safe," he replied. "Yes." The answer wasn't dramatic. It didn't carry grand declarations. It was steady, grounded, and real, exactly the kind of commitment she had never been offered in her entire life. She moved from the table to the window, resting her hands on the sill. She looked out at the empty land, the long stretch of dirt and brush that had once felt like a boundary she couldn't cross. Now it looked different, wider, less threatening, as if she wasn't trapped by it anymore. Thatcher approached slowly, stopping beside her, but leaving enough space to let her choose the moment. Maribel spoke without turning. "When I ran that night, I thought dying in the cold was better than being dragged back. Then I found this place. I thought maybe it would give me one night of safety." She finally looked at him. "I didn't think someone like you would walk through that door." He lowered his gaze for a moment. "I didn't think I'd find someone fighting this hard to stay alive." Their eyes held, the air between them tightening with the weight of everything that hadn't been said. Maribel stepped closer, not by mistake, but by choice. "If you stay," she said carefully, "I won't make you guess what I need. I'll tell you. And if you decide to leave later, I won't hold it against you. I don't want to lose the safety of this place." Thatcher reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back. When she didn't, he brushed his fingers lightly against her forearm. It was the first deliberate contact between them, gentle, grounding, chosen. "I'm not planning to leave," he said. "Not now. Not after everything we've seen of each other." Her breath shook, but she didn't step away. Thatcher continued, voice low but certain. We can rebuild this place. Fix the roof. Reinforce the walls. Make it something that belongs to both of us. Her lips parted in quiet disbelief. Both of us. It's not just a cabin anymore, he said. It's the start of something steady. She blinked hard, emotion rising too fast for her to hide. Thatcher, I don't want just safety. Her voice softened, trembling but determined. I want a life again. I want a place where I can wake up without fear. And if, she paused, steadying her breath, if that life includes you, then I'm not running anymore. Thatcher stepped closer, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate certainty. It includes me, he said. If you wanted to. Maribel exhaled, her eyes filling, her shoulders settling into a posture she hadn't known in years, one that didn't carry survival alone. He placed a hand at her back, light, steady, and she leaned into him without hesitation, her forehead resting against his chest. He held her with quiet strength, not gripping, not claiming, simply being present in a way that made every old fear lose its shape. Outside, the land stretched empty and silent. Inside, the cabin finally felt lived in. They stayed like that for a long time, listening to the fire crackle, the wind calm, and their own breathing find the same rhythm. When she finally lifted her head, Maribel spoke in a steady whisper. This is home now. Thatcher nodded. Yes, it is. The story didn't end with danger or escape. It ended with a choice. Two people, one haunted, one hunted, standing in the same quiet cabin, deciding that the next morning wouldn't be shaped by fear, but by the beginnings of a life they would build together. A safe place, a shared future, a peaceful, chosen ending.